Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the Pepper Dynamics Podcast, where we highlight all things related to the Pepperdine Grazia Deal Business School. Our guest today is Raymond Hall. Raymond is the head of human resources for the Americas at Jones Lang LaSalle, also known as JLL. Greetings, Raymond. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Ty. Glad to be here.
Now, JLL is a commercial real estate and property investment company. And I think you just joined him in, am I wrong in saying 2020, I believe it is?
That's correct, January 2020.
Yeah, joined him in 2020. Of course, you've been in corporate human resources for almost 20 years, and you have experience in leading diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts at a few of those stops throughout your career. You spent 11 years in the Army, undergrad at University of Georgia. And then, of course, the reason I have you on is you graduated from Pepperdine Grazia Deal's MBA program in 2019. And that's a gap between undergrad and grad school of about 26 to 27 years. So you felt the need to get more education, then you decided to choose Pepperdine. So, you worked in HR after coming out of the military, and you worked in HR, prior to, during, and after completing your MBA. I wonder what your reason for embarking on that MBA journey and furthering that business education was when you decided to go.
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, it was about improving my strategic capabilities. And when I assessed the different programs out there that could help me build that skill set, Pepperdine won out. I mean, when you think about the makeup of the class with so many other senior executives across different, functional areas, I just felt like it was the right environment, for me to continue to get those reps and get better at the things where maybe I might needed to improve in. It's amazing because I've been able to leverage those learnings, from the classroom and take back and implement in my day-to-day.
I wonder, thinking about that, I'm almost 20 years out myself in terms of starting an MBA program. And when you say enhance the strategic capabilities, talk to me a little bit about that. Like, did you see or feel like there were deficiencies, I guess, as you worked through your career prior to deciding to get an MBA?
So I don't think it was as much as having deficiency as much as it was, am I bringing everything I can bring to the table as our leadership teams made the best possible decision. And I give you an example. The company that I worked for prior to coming to JLL operated more as a holding company. So more than 80 different businesses across different industries. And acquisition was a huge, huge part of their growth. And so some of the lessons I've learned in the classroom and speaking to, not just the professors, but some of the business owners and other executives and how to look at deals, do the financial forecasting, and those things beyond the traditional HR work around due diligence and culture help me at the leadership table at my company show up differently and add more value.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. My journey, I worked for a while with football coaches at the American Football Coaches Association. It's kind of a professional trade group for the football coaching industry. And while I learned a lot about, putting on a national convention and education in terms of personal and professional development, when I sat at the table, if I sat at the table with executives, while I can bring some of the elements of what I've learned from working with coaches in terms of leadership, when it came to, as you mentioned, strategic initiatives or strategic thinking, I felt like there was a deficit. So it's interesting. We come about it almost similarly. You being in the business environment probably learned something. I actually felt like I didn't learn things, and there were things I needed to learn. I wonder about you. You were part of the part-time MBA program at Pepperdine. And as a part-time student, you were still working. I mentioned throughout the whole time, you worked throughout the whole time. I wonder about, and you mentioned it a little bit, direct translation from what you learned in those classes to when you showed up the next day at work, or while you're in school, while you're at work, some of the things you learned in classes while at Pepperdine, did they translate to what you were working on while you were still working during the program?
Yeah, it's amazing how easily those things translate. I talked about the M&A. That's just one part of it. But when you also look at the other aspects of the job of an HR leader, whether it's organizational development, in terms of building effective leadership teams. Some of the work that we did early on in the program, basically understanding how the brain works. For example, gave you a different way of thinking about how to solution for some of these problems when you may have some gaps on your team beyond some of the assessments that may be out there you can take. This really gave you some deeper insight in how to look at the situation or the challenges a little bit differently, and gave you, a different, very practical approach that you can apply. So it's everything from the business transaction side of it to the people development side of it, and then obviously the leadership impact.
I'm gonna dive into that a little bit because I'd like to know if there's actually an example of you like working with groups as being in HR, right? Working with different groups of people in different parts of a company and learning things in a class throughout a semester or a term and realizing, I've probably been approached just in a more efficient manner based on how these people think as leaders. Like, were there examples like that? Do you have any that are like that type of example?
Yeah, the examples are more again on the business side. I think when you start looking at the people side of it, cultures are so different, in organizations. So, and that kind of really lends itself to how you approach, different things. It doesn't mean that, you can't, it's almost that aha moment when you're sitting in class and you're having a conversation about something. You say, oh, that's why he acts like that, right? So, from a leadership perspective, and an org behavior point of view, those are some of the things that I'm referring to. But I do think the most value that program brought for me is giving me some nuggets that I could go back and insert on a day to day around some of the business issues and challenges.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting to me. Thinking about 11 years in the Army, military background.
Hmm.
If you spend 11 years in the United States military, right, any branch, you're going to know how to work. You're going to understand the importance of detail, understand why the work you do, how it fits, and why it's important to the overall scheme of things. I wonder about your approach to the rigor of academic work while you were in school and how that background kind of helped you in that, I guess, in that arena of school and classwork and classes and working with groups and teams, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And as I reflect on it, I think the background that really helped me push through because it was tough, working and trying to go to school at the same time. I don't have to tell you. I mean, you're doing it. It's a challenge, but I think that stick to it. Set a goal and finish what you start. Started long before I joined the military. I grew up on in a farming community in North Carolina, and I think that's where that work ethic and drive really started. The military really taught me the importance of, especially when you have a team. The number one spectator sport in business is boss watching, and so when you set that goal and you quit, probably not a good look for your team. It probably doesn't inspire many people, and so yeah, it was something I wanted to do to make me better. But it was also a part of me doing it to inspire other people that no matter what they decide to do in life, stick to it. You may hit roadblocks, there may be bumps in the road, but it'll pass. And so as long as you stick to it, and I think that's one of the biggest things that carried me through.
I do wonder, a lot of us who are students, some of us are getting our internships now, me being a MBA one for a first year. Some of us still don't have internships. Some of us wonder if, are we going to come out from an MBA, making this grandiose salary, or what exactly is going to happen when we finish. So I wonder about the process of, being a former athlete, you kind of get out of it what you put into it, right? You put the work in and you hope it pays off, skill, luck, talent, all mixed in together. I wonder about the payoff for some of us who are doing this MBA now, even, in the midst of a pandemic, but also just in terms of the business world. You've worked in corporate world that long. Are these type of degrees valued? As I know in the past they were heavily valued, but now, like, are these type of MBA degrees, just your advice from somebody who's been in the corporate world for so long?
Yeah, I can speak from my experience, and we do a lot of hiring, certainly at the executive level, but even at the management and senior producer level within my company, and the MBA is still valued for sure. And if you think about the skills and the experience gained, through a program like this, it only enhances what you already are bringing to the table that made you an attractive candidate, in the first place. So I do think it gives, some candidates a advantage for sure. One, because it shows that thirst for learning and that thirst to being the best at whatever it is that you do, regardless of industry or whatever walk of life you're coming from. There's something behind it because we know the rigor and the how much energy and time it really takes and commitment to actually complete something like this. The other value that's not often talked about is the network that you're able to build and continue to leverage many years after you've completed the program itself. And so those learnings continue long after you're done with the classroom when you walk across that stage. Those learnings will continue, long after you're done because you're able to continue to leverage that network. I can't tell you how many times I've had to pick up the phone and call a professor or call one of my classmates and say, "Hey, I got a problem," or "Can I get your perspective on this?" And they were there. I mean, those things that don't show up in the tuition. Those are just benefits of coming through the program.
So you've seen the value beyond just the MBA, the value of the network of alum and I guess cohort and classmates, professors, faculty, and staff from Pepperdine, and you see and have utilized that value since leaving. I think that's excellent information for a lot of us who are going through this program right now. I do want to ask you a question about human resources. Now, when you started in human resources and where human resources is now, I'd imagine that they're almost they're not the same, right? I mean, years ago, human resources probably was a simplified version of compliance, hiring, and making sure things are running how they're supposed to run in terms of the people in the organization. But now I think there's a big part of like culture and there's a big part of organizational leadership, organizational development. Talk to me a little bit about human resources from your perspective in terms of someone who's been in the industry for a while.
Yeah, it's definitely changed in terms of how you get the most, out of your people. When I was growing up, as a kid, I mean, my father worked as an engineer in a plant, and just if I think about what that looked like at that point in time, it was companies hiring doers. You get hired, you're told what to do, and you go do it. You get a paycheck, and you go home. Now, companies are hiring thinkers because they need that creativity, they need that innovation, they need that idea, and not necessarily to build something new. Sometimes it's just getting better at what you're doing. But you're hiring thinkers, and to manage that type of workforce is a little bit more complex when you think about how you engage them beyond compensation. So, how do you connect them to make sure they feel like they truly belong in an organization? And that's where a solid D&I strategy comes in to make sure that people feel really connected to where they work. And how do you give them those opportunities where they continue to learn and grow? Because it is different than it used to be, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Uh, what I'm seeing now is a lot of newer employees, particularly younger employees, they're even more socially conscious. So when you think about some of the events from last year, starting with the pandemic, but then you look at the racial tensions the middle of last year, their employees are waiting to see where the organization stands on certain things like that. And they make a decision whether they either stay with you or they find somewhere else to work. And so the whole notion of managing the workforce now is very, very complex. And the pandemic has made it even more so when you think about remote working now.
Yeah, that's interesting. The emotional intelligence needed to actually, especially in a role you're in, to advise other people in leadership, because I think you're a part of leadership there at JLL, to advise the other leadership, like, hey, you know, if we don't do or say the right things and actually have some teeth in what we do or say, we could potentially lose a lot of good people here within our organization. So, yeah, I think that's absolutely, to me, very important how much human resources has been enhanced over the last 15 to 20 years in terms of understanding people. I asked you a couple of questions here and then we'll wrap. First, it's about your actual role with JLL. Tell me about what the head of human resources for the Americas does in a what looks like a global company like JLL.
Yeah, so in addition to my role as head of human resource for the Americas, I also oversee our global capital markets and valuations business. So that's not just the U.S., LATAM, and Canada, but you also have EMEA and APAC as well. So roughly about 35,000 globally. My role today is different than it would be had there had there been no pandemic. Um, in a normal day, is working with the leadership team and really figuring out what our talent strategy is for our people, not just short term, but longer term too. So trying to anticipate, where the business is going and what type of skills, capabilities, experience you need, and build a plan around it. And obviously, leadership or executive succession plays a big part in that. And then obviously there's the board interaction, and things like that around executive comp and those sort of things. The pandemic, though, has kind of flipped all that on its head, and you really had to hone on the care of your people. And so when you think about how we approach reentry. So once our offices started to open, making sure we had the right safety protocols in place, making sure that we were able to help anticipate and show employees what that new experience would be in the workplace before they even came back. So we did really cool stuff like step forward campaigns and videos that actually gave people a virtual experience before they even came in, so they weren't intimidated by it. All of those things to include policy development around how we manage the remote workforce now, how we look at performance differently, and all of those sort of things. It's really helped change some of the things we do in terms of even how we develop our managers or our people leaders. It's a very challenging ask for us to help teams connected when you have a certain percentage at work and a certain percentage at home, and yet they're on the same team. So, how you deal with those dynamics? They're dealing with things they've never dealt with before, and so the HR roles now are a lot more complex than they were, even 2 years ago.
Right. And what you're doing sounds like it is very important to the company there. And like you said, since the pandemic, your role has been enhanced, which I'm actually kind of, I don't know how this sounds, but I'm kind of excited to see what the world is when we get past this pandemic, because there's been a lot of change and evolution, I think, in terms of digitally connecting and in terms of how people think about things. So I'm kind of excited about the adventure of post pandemic, whatever normal will be then. I ask this final question and then we'll wrap. You mentioned understanding why and how people make decisions and think the way they do, why and how a business decision may have been made, and the network that you have garnered since finishing your Pepperdine Grazie Dio MBA. I wonder, as you think back about your experience at Pepperdine, what aspect do you believe has benefited you the most?
When you asked that question, I was thinking which part of the curriculum changed me. It made me a better leader. And I don't think it was any one part. It wasn't, the global marketing. I don't think it was the international finance. I don't think it was, any of those things. I think it was the open and transparent discussions that we had as a team about real world type issues,
Right. Yeah.
and just really helping shape your perspective and forcing you really to think differently and really pushing and challenge you to really think differently. And you were challenged, Ty. You were really challenged when you were in the room with so many other executives to really go deep and contribute. Because if you don't contribute, you stand out too. And so when you translate that back into when you get back into the office and you have those moments of truth where you're trying to arrive at the best decision, that you built that muscle memory, and it's almost by default that your head is in the game in a very, very different way than it was before, and you're thinking differently than the way you before, and the organization benefits from that. So that's what I think was the most value for me outside of just what the subject matter areas were.
Right, exactly. And that's what some of us are experiencing now. That is excellent insight about some of the things that you can get when you're working on your MBA. I can't say enough that I think I'm learning to understand exactly what you're talking about in terms of group work, group discussions, in terms of understanding how to get the most for the group as a whole. I really appreciate you joining us here on the Pepper Dynamics podcast, Raymond.
No, it was a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
That was Raymond Hall. He is the head of human resources for the Americas at Jones Lang LaSalle, also known as JLL. He is a Pepperdine Grazie Dio MBA alumni. And of course, this is Ty Brown with Pepper Dynamics. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today.